Welcome again, ladies and gentlemen. This is your podcast,
Stirring the pot with Ronnie and Cheryl.
Stirring the Pot with Ronnie and Cheryl. Thank you again for the beautiful opportunity you gave us on the first podcast to share and to like. We still haven't had that many comments. I received one or two comments in my inbox, but I want you to please leave comments under the video from YouTube. We're trying to grow our YouTube Gahfu Garifuna channel. So you know the dynamics, but we're gonna repeat it again. So we have our
Miss
Hana,
Hannah.
our Hana. We have topics that we have pre-selected, pre-written. We stir in the pot, and then we pick one, and then we talk about that particular topic. So I'm gonna give the opportunity to my wife Cheryl to go ahead and select one of the topics from the Hana, so we could talk about it.
All righty, Lo. Miss Hannah, let's go ahead and start this pot and see what we're going to talk about today. Okay, so let's see. Here you go.
Okay, here we go. So today's topic is, what is your migration story? Wow, what a topic, because I am a migrant. I came from Guatemala at an early age. I was 19 when I came from Guatemala to Los Angeles, and it was in 1983. I was barely 19 years old, and I think it was in the month of July in 1983. It was a hot summer, and I have great memories of that time, the transition from coming from a small town in Guatemala, from San Antonio Suchitepeques, which is a small town, it was a small town then, to a big city, to a huge place with lots of people from different backgrounds. So it was a shock. What about yours?
Well, I was a lot younger than you. I migrated to the United States when I was about 4 years old. What I remember, in regards to my migration here to the United States is I remember being in our little village. I remember kind of the day that we left the village. It was me and my two sisters. We traveled with somebody. I don't recall the passage that we took. I'm sure it was probably the bus or something, but that part of the journey I don't recall. I do remember living in St. Pie Village in Belize. That majority of the kids that lived there, we lived with our grandparents because many of our parents had already migrated to the United States. All I remember back then was, coming to the States was, to me, in my 4 year old mind, was a scary thing because I know that once people said that they were coming to the States, we never saw them again. So to me, when they said coming to the state, it was like, oh my God, what's going to happen to me? In my 4 year old mind, we're going to like disappear. That's all those people who come to the States never return back to the village. But I remember arriving to what I know now to be the border prior to, I guess, what is it over there in San
San
Diego?
Isidro?
It's the San Isidro border.
Actually, it
So,
was probably Chula Vista, right there, right next door.
yeah, so that was again when I was about 4 years old. So I remember arriving there and the person who was traveling with us giving my older sisters instructions on whatever was supposed to transpire or whatnot. And I recall my aunt and uncle initially came to I guess pick us up from the border, but whatever happened, they weren't able to cross us over that particular time when they came to get us. So we ended up, me, my sisters, and we ended up spending the night inside of that holding cell, the immigration holding cell on the other side of the United States. I remember being scared. I remember it was very sterile. I remember my sisters and I, again, being together. And I recall that night, because we spent the night there, my sisters took turns watching over me. I laid across my sister's lap. They both standing up throughout the night. And I just remember it feeling cold, feeling scared. And then, according to the story that my parents told me, is that my uncle Lincoln, my father's brother, who was in the military at the time, fortunately, he was around the San Diego area, and they were able to get a hold of him. And back then, if you were in the military, you were able to kind of cross over easily. So they were able to get a hold of my uncle, And him using his military credential was able to cross me and my two sisters over the next day without any issue, and we were able to make it to the United States. After that, and we met our parents. And for me, it was like the first time because my parents migrated here when I was 9 months old. So I lived with my two siblings and my grandmother in the village. So I had no recollection of my parents. So that was something I had to get to, know my parents because I, again, had no memory of them. And we arrived there sometime, I think in November. So once we made it from San Diego all the way to LA, I can't even remember. It's like everything happened so quickly. But the first memory of us arriving to my parents' home was a house full of people. It was like all these aunts and uncles and cousins and everybody there, and all of us gathering there, they were giving us gifts and everything like that. I mean, my first toy that I remember having was this little telephone that had like wheels. It was colorful and the eyes blinked and things like that. And then the second memory of the first day being here in the United States was the women in the family taking me and my sisters into the kitchen and piercing our ear. They were like, "You are in the United States." All the little girls get their ear pierced. So they pierced our ears the old fashioned way with a pin. It's funny now, but that was like the first thing that happened when I arrived to the United States.
Wow. All right. Well, that's quite a story. Really fascinating. Now, that one thing I want to ask you that got me confused, and then I'll tell my part of the story as an immigrant. You said you were 9 months old when you moved from Punta Gorda to Siembite, and then you were 4 years old when you came to the United States, right?
Yes, I mean, my father was initially stationed, I think, in Barranco or in Punta Gorda during the time that I was born, and I believe we remained there up until my parents migrated. So prior to that, they took us to my grandmother's village, to my mom's village in Saint Bite, and I remember just being there from, as far as I know, from 9 months old until 4 when we migrated to the United States.
Wow, that's
Hmm.
fascinating. As for me, I remember that we went to school in Guatemala from first grade, actually kindergarten, all the way up until high school. Um, then at that point, my mom said, "You have to come to the States. I have made all the necessary efforts for you to come legally." And so she had the paperwork for the green card. And so we were able to go to the U.S. Embassy in Guatemala City for a checkup. We went to the doctor prior to actually getting paperwork from the U.S. Embassy in Guatemala. And then we we drove from San Antonio to Tapachula, Chiapas, Mexico, where they had an airport, and then we took a plane from Tapachula all the way to Mexico City, and then the following day, flight from Mexico City to Tijuana, and that's where our parents met us. It was my mom and my dad, Marco Dubon. He was the one that first migrated out of the family. He was living with my mom already in Los Amates, Izabal, and he migrated to New York. And then my mom stayed behind. And right around 1976, during the earthquake in Guatemala, my mom left to come to join him in Los Angeles. She came to Los Angeles, so he had to move from New York to Los Angeles to meet with my mom and their daughter. They have my sister Mary already, very small when she came, just like probably a little older than you, a little bit older than you when Mary came. And so that's my story. I've been here since 1983. Went to school to learn English as a second language.
Hmm.
I was able to overcome a lot of the obstacles from getting adjusted to the life in the United States, to the culture shock, of course, meeting lots of people from other countries, especially from Mexico. There was nothing but Mexicans all over the place, and nothing bad about Mexicans or nothing. I'm just saying that it was heavily dominated by the number one migrants who were from Mexico, and then and then a lot of African Americans as well. And eventually, I got my transferable units to go to university. So I got my transferable units from East Los Angeles College.
Mhm.
And then from there, I went with a scholarship to Cal State University, Dominguez Hills in Carson. That's where I got my bachelor's in business. And then years later, once we were together and we were married, you encouraged me to go to school, go back to school, and I went and got my master's degree in public administration.
I
What a
want you to,
journey,
I
right?
want you to share that story about you working at the onion plant or something like that
Yes,
during that
yes.
time.
Initially, when we came, it was myself, my brother, and another friend and a cousin. We all came together on the same flight. They had visas, we had green cards. And so we all came and started looking for employment. Back in the days, they said it was easy to find employment, but we couldn't find good employment, that the one that we wanted to find, right? But we ended up working because we were desperate. We wanted to get a job and then go back to Guatemala and spend Christmas in 1983, 1984 Christmas. And so we ended up working for it was a small company on San Mateo and 7th Street around, I don't remember exactly, but it was a Panamanian lady who was the manager there. And she told us, you guys are hired, you want to work, but it's overnight. You have to peel onions. And the onions were used for La Victoria salsa. The company that was in, I think, Orange County. So they used to bring all the peeled onions on a minivan all the way to Orange County for processing and making the salsa. But during those, I think it was probably 6 months that we worked there. We made some good money, but it was hard labor. It was tearing up from the onion, the strong smell of the onions, and working at night was horrible. It's like we have an education, we wanted something better, but that's what we had to do to be able to get some money and fly back to Guatemala and spend Christmas there, and then have to come back again because we knew that there was no future for us in Guatemala. So I ended up coming back in May 1984, prior to the beginning of the Olympics, uh, to move permanently with my mom. And I begged my mom to give me a second chance, a second opportunity for me to go to school and make my life.
So, the story that my parents tell me in regards to when they came, initially my mom had the opportunity to come because my uncle who worked for the federal government, he had he was petitioned for my mom for her to get her passage to come over here legally. But my mom, did not want to come here by herself. So the arrangement she made with my dad was like, you find your way over there first before I come here, because I don't want to come here by myself and be torn away not only from my husband but also my children. So my dad migrated here, first, and then my mom shortly followed and everything like that. But then the story that my mom, would tell me about the stories of the jobs that they had, like working at the tuna factory, working at these various places and stuff like that. And it was so funny that one of the places that she did work at, they didn't um they didn't understand like why people that look like my mom and myself worked in places like that, because it was like, well, this
Like
is
black
usually,
people.
yeah, like black, quote unquote, black people, because it was basically like, okay, like this is someplace that illegal aliens work at. And my mom was like, well, yeah, we don't have any papers, and they couldn't believe that my mom didn't have any papers because it was a new thing for them. And then, I mean, that's like a common theme with my migration story, because when I enrolled in school at the time, um, thank goodness for amnesty, because that's how we were able to get our paperwork, was through amnesty, forgiveness and everything. And so during that time, after we got amnesty, and then I enrolled in college using, of course, I have my green card. And I recall when I went to go register for school, back then, I think here in the United States, African American people were referred to as Black Americans,
Mm.
and not African Americans like they are today. So I'm filling out my application and everything like that. And then the lady who was there at the front desk, she happened to be a Black American. And so I'm filling out my registration form and everything like that, and I don't see a box for me to fill out. So I saw at the bottom it said other, so I checked the box other, And the lady,
Instead of African
instead of
American.
African American,
Oh.
because I technically was not an African American because I wasn't an American citizen. So I couldn't check that box. So the lady behind the desk, she got offended when I turned in my paperwork to her. She looked at me and she was like, "Oh, you checked the wrong box," and she X'd it out. She told me to initial it, and then she marked Africa. She marked Black American. I told her I can't sign that. She was like, "Why can't you sign that?" I said, "Because that would be me committing fraud. I can't do that. That's a legal document. If I sign that, I'm going to be committing a federal offense and I could go to jail." And she did not understand what in the world I was talking about. And she became more irritated and frustrated with me. She was like, "Listen, if you want to register in school, you need to fill this out. You need to sign it." And I was like, "No, I need to speak to your supervisor because I have a green card." And she was like, "I don't know what you're talking about." I was like, "Yeah, I know you don't know what I'm talking about, but I can't fill out that paperwork because I can't sign that because that's a legal document. I will be committing fraud." I was like, "I need to speak to your supervisor." So her supervisor came. Long story short, her supervisor came, and I explained to her, I was like, "I have a green card. She wants me to say that I'm Black American, and I'm not Black American because I'm not a citizen." And so she pulled her staff. She was like, "Did she show you this?" And she was like, "Yeah." Just like, "She can't. She's right. She can't do that. That's illegal for her to put that she's an American citizen and she's not." So the lady comes back frustrated, well, I'm like thinking like, "Well, I told you so, you idiot." But
Wow.
but it was basically, throughout the stand, that was my experience, you know, in the United States all the time. They couldn't understand that I was this Black migrant because they weren't used to that over here in this part of life. I guess in the East Coast or whatever, they're used to more Black migration. But here on this side in the West Coast, it was like a weird thing for them. Every time I kept telling them I have a green card and I had to show them, it was just like confusion all over the place. It was funny.
This is fascinating. The stories of migration are fascinating. Now, what is your migration story? Can you share your migration story with us? Make sure you leave the comments under this video. Also, like, share, and also, if you're not a subscriber, please subscribe to our channel because that will help us to grow faster and be able to. We want to travel. We want to be able to go places and create
Visit
content.
you in the community and talk to you directly and have you be part of this conversation. But one of the things also, when you mentioned going to school and all that kind of stuff, that's a misconception that a lot of people have about migrants when they come to the United States. Like, we use things, we get things for free. But I know during the time when we came here, majority of the migrants that I knew that came from Central America went to Catholic schools. They paid for their education. I mean, I don't, well, back then, now it's a different story. But I know with my parents, we never went to public school. We all, went to Catholic school growing up. Our parents paid for tuition for three children to go to, private school out of pocket. And then back then, there wasn't any such thing for migrants to be able to get any kind of medical support or anything like that. It was illegal. I still think it's illegal right now in some states. So whenever we had to go to the doctors, our parents paid cash in order for us to see the doctor. Thank goodness that we had doctors in our community that worked with migrant families, that they were able to do payment plan. I remember going to Western Dental when we were younger, and that dentist, they would just do payment plans for all of the migrant children and families that went there. And again, our parents never relied on anything, got anything from the government. Everything that they did for us, their children, they paid for.
So what I'm listening to, what you're saying, and this is fascinating because I could tell you a different story from my own point of view, is that for a lot of Belizeans who came back in the
Not
days,
just Belizean, I'm talking
but
about
the
Central
major,
America.
yeah,
Yeah.
I would say Central American, even Mexican. So a lot of those families did not send their kids to public schools because they were not allowed because they didn't have papers. Or what was the reason why you ended up
Well,
in a private Catholic school?
I know I could only speak for myself and for other families that I know had the same situation. A lot of the times back then, when you went to a public school, you needed paperwork, you needed a social security, you needed all of these other forms
Oh,
of
okay.
identity. And so, when you go to a Catholic school, they don't ask you for that information. As long as you could pay, they don't ask
Interesting.
you for those information,
That's fascinating.
But in public school, you're required to have, again, all of these things you have to get into the system, and because a lot of the families, whether they were from Belize, Guatemala, and Honduras, I mean, because where I went to, the community was multi. It wasn't just Belizeans. It was Guatemalan and Honduranian, people in my neighborhood, and we were pretty much in the same boat. My neighborhood that I
Can you
grew up
mention
with.
the name of the school that you
No,
attended?
I don't
No?
need to mention the
Oh,
name of the
okay.
school. It was a Catholic school. We all went to Catholic schools and stuff like that. And I won't mention the name of the school because you still have people who are going to that school that may not necessarily have their paperwork. So I won't mention
Oh,
the
I
name of
see.
the school.
Also, I noticed that among a lot of the Belizeans, and I'm saying this because I really wanna. I know that you are curious about our migrant story, and one of the things that I learned from living with my wife as a Belizean and as a Guatemalan and being in the community is that a few of the people who came from Belize got jobs as teachers in these Catholic schools, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, a lot of them were teachers prior to. So what happens is when you come from other countries, as you know, that a lot of their skills are not transferable. You may be a doctor in one country, but then when you come to the United States, you need to pass these things that you may not be a doctor over here. You may end up just being a physician assistant or something
I
like
know a
that.
doctor here in Long
So
Beach.
so we have so we have a lot of people who migrated from Central America, regardless of where they came from, that were perhaps teachers. They were credentialed teachers, whether in Guatemala, Belize, or Honduras. But then when they migrated to the United States, they couldn't get those credentials, and a lot of them became teachers' assistants here,
Right.
not necessarily teachers. Some
Mhm.
of them did eventually become teachers. They passed whatever tests required them to become teachers here in the United States, and they were able to get their full teaching credentials, but a
Mhm.
lot of them did not and just ended up being teachers' assistants.
Good. Well, let me tell a little bit more about me. So, living in the United States from 1983 up until 1989, I decided just to concentrate on going to school. Uh, no socializing, very little socializing, really. Um, no, honestly, I just dedicated myself to learning English as a second language, and I did. I got all my transferable units to go to university. Once 1989 came, I transferred to Dominguez Hills, and that's where
That was party time, the frat
that was when
boys.
actually I got to live on campus. I was living at Pueblo Dominguez, which is part of the housing there, and I was able to really experience and be more sociable. I became the president of my fraternity. It was a local chapter first called AXE, but when I joined them, it was already in transition to become TKE, Tau Kappa Epsilon. It's a international fraternity, and the doors opened up to me. But then I went back to the community that I knew, my Guatemalan community, and people who I had met while living in Izabal in Los Amates. My mom used to travel. She was a nurse there. She was a director of a health center. And so she would take us to trips to Morales Izabal, to Bananera, Puerto Barrios, and Livingston. She would do workshops on family planning and things like that. So every time we visited, whether it was a Garifuna community in Puerto Barrios or in Livingston or a Creole community in Bananera or Morales Isabel, we would be welcome with reggae music right there, with the Creole people were, and then with drumming and fun things to do in other communities like Garifuna communities. I really got to know that part of Guatemala that I didn't know, and I fell in love. So when I was here in 1989, 90, I started looking for those people, and I found Flavio Alvarez, my padrino pops, and I started working with the Garifuna community, doing fundraisers, and the money that was fundraised through Union Livingston, which was the fraternity, the not the fraternity, what do they call it? The association that Flavio Alvarez led as the president, and then Yolanda. Nunez was there too. so many people that don't come to my mind right now. The names are just several people in the Garifuna community from Guatemala. And then I met a lot of Belizeans there too, among the friends and everything that used to attend the events. And that's where I met your dad and your mom at an event that we did for Esquipulas, the Black Jesus, right?
San
It was
Isidro, ¿no?
no, it was
Is it
Esquipulas. It
Esquipulas?
was a
Okay.
fundraiser for Esquipulas. We wanted to fundraise money so that we could actually retouch the image of Esquipulas in Livingston, Izabal. And that's where I met your parents, not knowing that I was going to marry you, meet you later. But I met even Palabras, your uncle, Memo, Mr. Apolonio. I met him prior to meeting you. I met Ellis Norales. And so it's fascinating to talk about migration. So that's my piece so far.
Well, again, being, the different various stories of migration, a lot of our community back then, again, everybody migrated differently, and I'm not going to tell anybody's story of how they migrated, but then during that time, our community was really close knit. So it wasn't just about, being nationalism, it was about being a community. And we were in a community that had people that were from Guatemala, Belize, Nicaragua, Mexicans, and all that kind of stuff. We were just all there, and we all protected each other. Again, a lot of us were in the same boat. So back then, when the police used to come down the neighborhood, and before you would see the kids out there playing, and as soon as the police car drove down our street, you would see all of the kids disappear and run into the house, because we didn't want to get stopped by the police back then. It's kind of like what's going on today.
Oh, wow.
Back then, prior to 86, 87, those of us who were not here legally documented or whatnot, who were undocumented back then, we were told, we were trained by our parents, if you get pulled over by the police, don't tell them where you're from. Tell them that you're from, from a place where if they do, deport you, you would at least still be on the American side.
So it
You
looks like
know,
back in those days, then the police and the INS, it was called INS, it
yes,
was not
back
called
then.
ICE back
Yeah,
then.
back then it was
So
Immigration
Immigration and
Nationalization
Nationalization
Services.
Services, yes, INS, we're connected, I guess, because of what I'm hearing from you. So when the police came around, it was like La Migra was coming too,
Yes,
right?
yes, yes. So back then, I assumed they were working hand in hand, because, yeah, if you were not legal and the police found out, they were reported to the INS back then. So a lot of people who did migrate here, found themselves, heading back to their country of origin. So it was known. We were always taught, one of the safety lessons that our parents taught us was to always take a different direction home. So we never took the same direction home, just in case, there were, police on this side. You go and you walk the other way, but you don't look suspicious or anything like that. So, and in case of an emergency, who to contact, back home, and who to contact here. So we were prepared, you know.
One thing I want to ask you though is, so to be able to maintain your identity, I'm not talking about your speaking Garifuna or whatever, but your identity as a Belizean, as a family who came from Central America. What are some of the things that you guys did to be able to maintain that cohesiveness? Because one of the things that I remember hearing from other Belizeans is like their parents told them, no, you have to become Americanized if you want to stay here. Try to blend in. How did were you able
Mhm.
to fight the two different battles?
Well, I guess, again, every family is different. For a lot of people, assimilating was easier, to just blend in and pretend to be quote unquote black or American or whatnot. But in our family, that wasn't the case. And in my family, it was important for our father, for our parents, to make sure that we maintain our Garifuna identity. So, the one thing that my parents was like, no, when you're out there, not assimilate, but when you're out there, you protect yourself, but when you're here, you're Garifuna. When you're inside this home, my father was adamant, either you speak English or you speak Garifuna. There was no nothing in the middle. It was just like basically just that. And our parents spoke Garifuna to us in the household. When our grandmother came to visit, my grandmother intentionally, she knew English, she understood English, but when our grandmother came to visit, she intentionally would not speak anything but Garifuna to us, when she came to visit us. So we in the community, again, our community was very, very close knit growing up. It's a lot closer than it is today. So we would gather all the time over the weekend. We would be by somebody's house, and there was always something going on, and the cultural preservation was there, not maybe at a grandstand, but, when we went to somebody's house, when we visited somebody's house, it was always something that was being done culturally, during that time. So that's how we maintain in our household. That's how we maintain our identity. Because again, every single day it was a reminder. My parents always told us, "Mama American Pugia, Garifuna Pugia," okay, meaning that you're not American, you're Garifuna. So that identity was solidified in us from the time that we were young, and it remains with me. And of course, with our kids, I make sure that our kids know their Garifuna heritage, as well as their Chinese heritage and their Guatemalan Spanish heritage. It's very important for us to make sure that our children know who they are, where they come from.
Yes. Well, what is your migration story? Please leave your comments under this video. Also, if you have any topics in mind that you would like us to discuss, please write it in a comment under the video, and we will read it. We'll make sure that we take notes, and then we will bring the topic for our next show. Um, this is your show, your podcast called Steering
Stirring
the
the
Pot
pot,
with Cheryl and
Ronnie.
yes. And so, what is your migration story? Let us know. I mean, this is fascinating what I hear from Cheryl when I hear what I'm telling you about my own experience. I believe that I was able to overcome a lot of obstacles as a human being. I was able not only to live a better life by getting an education, I feel a much better human being today because of the things that I've done to be where I am, not only because I got my education, but because of the principles that I follow. I'm Catholic. I am someone who loves family, someone who loves. I love to DJ, and that's my sidekick, my side hustle. Right. I have the largest collection of Garifuna music as well. Um, I did a few podcasts on early days with labuga.com. It was a radio station and a website. Um, I've done a lot of things in the Garifuna community, but best of all, I
You
love
married me.
I,
That's the
I
best
love
thing
I
you've
love what I
done.
do, and I love the fact that I found a beautiful woman who is understanding, who gives me the love and the freedom to grow together. We give each other that freedom to be who we are and to be able to give the best of us. Right? We're not constraining anyone. We like to grow, and when we grow shoulder to shoulder. We grow together. Right?
True,
Uh
true,
huh.
true. I mean, but yeah, this whole migration thing, it is so funny because we do come from different countries, and we were able to meet each other here. Like you say, you met pretty much all my family members prior to you meeting me, but that's another story for another
And
day.
on top of that, we got married in Livingston. We got married in 2009 in the beautiful town of La Boga, Livingston, at the community center. Is
I
that what they
think,
call it?
is it the Garifuna Community
Yeah, the
Center?
Garifuna Cultural
Cultural
Center.
Center. Yes, yes, yes,
Yeah,
yes,
which is in La Loma, right there. That's where we got married,
yes.
and it was a beautiful time because we brought our moms. My mom was there. Your mom was there when
Hmm.
she was alive, and we invited family from Punta Gorda, from Belize, from Belize City, and a few people showed up, locals also, and it was just a wonderful time. We were able to really enjoy our moment where we solidify our marriage. But that's our story as migrants, right?
Yeah, migrant, a beautiful
Mhm.
migration
Is
story.
there anything else you want to add to this as far as gatherings coming together? Some of the places in Los Angeles where your people came together. I don't know. Is there anything else?
It was just like I said, back then it was a close knit. We didn't have, you know, it was just we just protected each other. Like I said, it was different people from different countries. I mean, even in my neighborhood, we had a Jewish family, we had Christian families, we had, Muslims. We all just lived together, in
And this
that
was
in
it.
that
Back then they call it South
South
Central.
Central LA.
South
It was
Central.
South Central LA, and even it was just it was different. I know the the thought that people have of South Central, but back in the days, we were able to ride our bikes, we were able to be children, we were able to walk to the park by ourselves, and we had a great time. I had a great time. I had a great childhood being raised up in that area. And again, it was just the community. We would have our neighbors from other countries. They would invite us to cookouts, to barbecue. We had a neighbor. He worked at the Redondo Beach, and he would bring fish and crab. And my mom would make
At the pier, he worked at the
yeah, he
pier.
worked at the pier, so he would bring home, like whatever it is that he brought home for the community. We would have like a community barbecue. Everybody mix a little something something. My mom would make Johnny cake, fried jack or tortilla to go with the crab meat or whatever. So it was a community. It was truly a community, not just with our Garifuna and Central American community, but the neighborhood.
Right.
And then I remember, you know, just what we did was just every single time that we got together when we were with our family, it was just always something cultural. I mean, I remember when my grandmother passed away in Belize, and my brother passed away in Belize, and because of the lack of um, paperwork that my parents didn't have, they couldn't go back to the funeral. So,
Hmm.
we did a service for them here. The community came, and it was just a lovely thing to do. So back then, community was very important. And I think even now, as you can see with everything that's going on now, community again is special in protecting those who cannot protect themselves with what's going on around here. So community, whether you're from whatever country you come from, whatever your legal status is, we are all human beings and we rely on our community. And I think that's like the most important thing to take away from this particular segment is migration, migrants. They're people too. Our story of coming, how we came here is different, but in our own individual way, we contribute. We contribute. We have our gifts that we bring into this world.
Hmm.
And regardless of whatever your migration is, we have something to offer and to give and contribute into society.
Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you. And please, I want you to subscribe, like, and share this content. We want to be able to grow as a channel. This is Gahfu Garifuna channel, and today's topic is what is the migration story? Please leave your comments under this video. And if you have any suggestions to make on any topics, please do so, because we want to talk about places here in Los Angeles where we as migrants used to hang out. There are lots of places that we could talk about. I remember um, once I started dating you, it was 48 on Hoover. It was the little the park on Carver School, right?
Yeah, over there by the Carver School.
Carver School, right there
Mhm.
on I think it was Vernon and McKinley.
I think
Yeah.
so. And that little place over there off of Vermont where it was the Honduranian lady, she had a little restaurant or
Oh
something over
yes, it
there.
was on. That was on the corner of Vermont, 1 block away from Vernon. It was a restaurant owned by this lady from Honduras. It was
Mm,
Richard's mom,
mm.
Richard, and his brother Freddie. Many places that I remember living here in this beautiful part of Los Angeles. In the communities that we nurture, the places that we remember that we visited, and it's just the fun and everything. We're going to talk about it in our next segments, so please make your suggestions. We can talk about the schools as well, places that you went to and things that happened, the soccer tournaments, the basketball tournaments, uh, so many things. So thank you again
I'm
for tuning in.
curious. I want to ask you, so because you came here at an older age, what was there a culture shock when you came from Guatemala to here? I mean, of course,
Yeah.
I didn't experience that because I pretty much was raised up here, again from the age of 4 and onward. But that must have been something for you to come here, being from Guatemala and then coming here when you were 19 years
Yeah.
old.
Yeah, it was hard because the way we came, right? We came with paper, we came with the green card, And so when we entered through Tijuana, we were able to be sworn in. They took a picture of us. Eventually, we received our green card, and we got a social security card later on. We went to the security office. We went to the DMV to get our license, and through all of it, I remember that the dominant people here around. See, I came to Montebello, and Montebello is East Los Angeles, so it was predominantly Latinos, mostly Mexican background. It was a lot of Chicanos. Chicanos are those born from Mexican families, Mexican parents, born in the United States. They call them Chicanos. And so there was a lot of that. There was the lowriders. There was the it was things that I did not identify with because I'm not Mexican. So it was hard for me to like really understand that culture. And then being in America, I go, where the hell is the white people? Where are the gringos? I don't see them around. So it was funny. That was my story. And I remember that how segmented these cities are, these places are in America. And little by little, I learned, right?
Yeah, yeah,
That we all try to find that comfort place to live within the people who we identify as. And eventually, I made my way through the heart of Los Angeles, where I met with my people from Central America, and I hung out with Guatemalans, Belizeans, and Hondurans, and the Garifuna and other people. It was just beautiful. And then eventually, I opened my own store. I had a Guatemalan store on Western and Melrose, right north of Los
Mi
Angeles.
Guatemala store,
Mi
right?
Guatemala store. Yeah, I had another earlier than that. It was probably in 1994. I had a little mini restaurant, a stand, a food stand. It was on 28th and Vermont, and that gave me the opportunity to really get to mingle and be immersed among Guatemalan people, mostly Spanish Guatemalans. And then I was able to get into producing. I started producing Garifuna music, bringing bands. So I would produce events and everything. So it was next. That will be our next story. We'll talk about it. Appreciate your being here. This is Steering the Pot with Cheryl and Rony. Any closing remarks?
I think we stirred the pot pretty good today, especially in regards to, the migration, information and stuff like that. It's just fascinating to me, all of the people that we know who migrated to this country, for that American dream, and whether they achieved it or not, they came here, just coming here, to leave the familiarity of where you come from and to just come to another country, sometimes not even knowing anyone or having family over here, and then just doing what you do, that's amazing to me.
Yes.
So for us to have come from, where we came from, a humble beginning, our parents' migration story, our own migration story, and for us to live here in the United States today and have our children, it's amazing. It's been an amazing journey. Me meeting you, I don't know if I would have met you if I was still in Belize.
And the fact that hard work has paid off. We own our own house, so we're at that stage where we have really lived the American dream, and we give back a lot to the community.
Yes.
We give back every day.
Yes.
Appreciate you. Thank you again. And we're gonna say goodbye because we don't want to take too much of your time.
Yes. All righty, Ronnie. Well, thank you for stirring the pot with me, and I look forward to next time. So take care. Ayo.
Ayo.